It's another interesting episode of Labor Lens where we bring to you updated information in the world of work and pay. I am Sharon Ijason. On this week's edition of the program, we'll continue our discussion on the plight of workers in Benue State. But first, let's take the news. We will be right back.
Frederick Herbert Stiflin has called for sustained and deepened collaborations of public sector, private sector, labor, civil society organizations, and other interest groups in policy campaigns and advocacy towards Nigeria's industrialization drive. This recommendation was made at the group's industrialization report in Lagos, where it also called for the total overhaul of the nation's industrialization policies.
And the labor union can be actually brought in as part of the critical stakeholder civil society organizations to moderate the interaction or relationship between the private sector and the government sector, because those are the key sector. Government alone cannot do everything. Private sector alone can also not do everything. But if you have a proper interface between the public sector, which is government, and the private sector, and when the labor union and other civil society organizations start serving as moderators, so whatever promises government made to the private sector, and whatever promises private sector also made to the public sector, the labor unions and other civil society organizations can then ensure that each of these two key stakeholders are pushed to fulfill their promises at every point in time.
Lots of government political will to industrialize. Government must create the enabling environment. The environment must be right to encourage people to invest. Number one, the issue about interest rates, funding of projects. If you ask people to set up industry, then you have to provide the capital, credit, access to credit, and at an affordable rate. That's one aspect. So, government also must need to also help to ensure that locally produced goods are available at very reduced and competitive rates compared to imported goods. As it is now, what we say is a lot of goods are dumped in Nigeria, cheap, inferior, lower quality goods. They are dumped here, and the ones that are locally produced are expensive. The cost of doing business is high in Nigeria.
Interview segment this week, I will be speaking with the president of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Ayuba Waba. He will be shedding light on what the Labour Center has been able to do in terms of engaging states who are having difficulties in terms of payment of salaries. He also spoke on the new national minimum wage that workers are having high expectations about. Take a listen. A lot has happened in several states across the country. On Labor Lens, we've discussed about non-payment of salaries in Kogi, in Kaduna, the mass sack. But this episode, we are actually concerned about the situation in Benue State. And as the NLC president, what's your reaction towards the non-payment of salary in that state and in other states?
You recall that our workers in Benue had to go on an indefinite industrial action, where we had to wade in, and we also reached a kind of agreement and understanding, where immediately they were able to pay 2 months, and then we agree on a formula to be used to try to defray the monthly salary and pensions. And since then, we have tried to follow up on what is happening in those states. Let me make the point clearly. Whereas in many states, the chief executive tried to hide over the issue of maybe lack of funds, but clearly speaking, it's about priority. We have since found out that it's about priority. Where you see salary and pensions not being paid as and when due, if you look at the center point of it, is that those states have not prioritized workers' issue. And therefore, these are clear issues that we have to confront because workers create the wealth. Pensioners have put in the best of their life in the service of either the state or the nation. And therefore, they are not a liability. Workers are not a liability. So when people hide under the issue of paucity of funds and then refuse to pay workers, you can see the economic implication of it. In most of those states, economic activities will come to a standstill. Even market women complained, and I've repeated this severally. There were states we went to, market women traders joined us because they said it's when the workers are being paid that the economy gets stimulated, and that's when they can also make ends meet. So this is the reality, and therefore it's a priority to us. To NLC, it's a priority, and that's why we have gone to several states. But we have also found out that since it is about issue of priority, we have also made it a point of duty. Both pensioners and workers in states where they are not being paid their salary, they must also work assiduously not to give any form of support to such government, especially where deliberately they refuse to pay workers or they treat workers as slaves, where you massacre workers without recourse to labor laws, without respecting their dignity as workers, and you even refuse to pay their benefit, their terminal benefit. We have said clearly that those governors should not expect any support from workers, pensioners, and their family, including allies. This is a position we have deliberately taken because enough is enough. We cannot continue to lament. We must also use our voting power to tell any system that we have what it takes, inform us an organization that was well organized to also take a proper position. So clearly speaking, we are tired of lamentation. We have protested in some of those states, but it's like the more you protest, the more they become hardened in addressing those issues. Like you mentioned the issue of Kaduna. After sacking those about 40,000 workers under the guise of reforms, up till now, no single worker has been paid his benefit. And this is most unfortunate. Secondly, those workers, in most cases, those that are occupying government houses, those houses were sold and they were thrown out. Not even giving them the benefit of the offer of first refusal. They were not given that opportunity. In most cases, it was sold to the highest bidder. In some states that have workers at heart, in fact, if you have liability that is not paid, it is computed and therefore is deducted from the cost of the houses is deducted from your liability, especially gratuity, where workers that have worked for 10 years are entitled to gratuity, or those that have even put in 30 or 35 years in service. So clearly, those are the issues. And we have made the point that workers and unions must also drive these processes of engagement, and therefore will not lament. So clearly speaking, we are not going to give any support to any state that refuses to pay salary. In fact, that is a decision of the National Executive Council of NLC, our civil society allies, and our labor centers.
Okay, if paucity of fund is one challenge that most of the states are claiming to be faced with, do you think it's time that states actually diversify? Maybe there might be a solution.
States are supposed to diversify. They can't continue to over-rely on what comes in from the federation allocation every month. Many states have diversified, but we also realize that in many states, the internally generated revenue is like a pocket money. Nobody actually discloses the exact amount that is coming in as internally generated revenue. So clearly speaking, accountability is one thing. Getting those revenue is also one thing. But in many states, it's just money for the boys, and therefore it's like pocket money. And that is why those states are in a very serious situation. Let me make the point. Why we said it's not essentially about lack of resources. You are aware that bailouts have been given. Outside the bailout, budget support funds have been given in billions to more than 30 states. And we have also states that have not assessed those bailouts, they have not assessed budget support, but they are paying salary as and when due. Not because they have much, but because they prioritize the issue of salary. And I made the example of Jigawa. Jigawa never assessed the bailout. They never assessed budget support. But they said, even without federation allocation, they will be able to pay salary for 6 months. Where did they get the money? It's about prudency. It's about not engaging in one elephant project that at the end of the day will only be beneficial to the person executing the project. It should be life-touching projects that are necessary. So this is the whole issue, and this is the whole argument. And therefore, when we say that it's not essentially about lack of resources, take for instance Imo. Imo, among the southeastern states, is supposed to be one of the richest states in the southeast. But that's where you have pensioners receiving as low as 5,000 per month. And that's why you even pay salary up to now in percentage. So it's about priority. But yet you have states like Enugu that is doing all the best it could to pay salary as a when due, despite the paucity of resources. You saw recently when there was delay in distributing the federation allocation. State like Enugu went and paid salary. And so this is the reality. And therefore, workers must also prioritize the battle, draw a line, and also engage in the issues. This is what we have been able to establish in the course of our visits to those states. And therefore, this is the center point of our argument. And therefore, why we will not continue to lament is the fact also that in our hand, we have also the power to try to undo and do. We will also support, and where we think we should not support, we should be able to say that clearly.
Okay, the bailout fund, looking at what you said, that's taking me back to the bailout fund and the Paris Club refund. Particularly in Benue State, the first tranche of money they received is 12.5 million naira. Million, then there's a 6.8 billion naira that was the second tranche. What's your take about this? Do you think the workers of Benue State are supposed to be languishing in poverty after the federal government made these funds available to them?
Certainly no. There is no state that have assessed the bailout. Because the bailout is like a support to the monthly allocation. So if you account for the bailout, you also need to account for the monthly allocation. If you put the two side by side, I'm not sure there is any state that will not be able to address the issue of salary, pensions, and even do some developmental projects. So put all of them together, including the internal general revenue. So what is happening is that because of that budget support that came in, and because of the fact also that the Paris Club reform came in, most of them even hid the monthly allocation. Some diverted to buy hotels. We read on papers, and these informations, nobody have actually denied them. Where some governors go to buy hotels in Lagos. I read that very well, and EFCC have come out clearly to say that this is how the funds have been diverted. The irony of it is that nobody have been charged to court, and no action has been taken up to now. And we are insisting that for us to have a society that will address the issues of corruption, the issue of this immunity that our political elites hide under to perpetrate all manner of evil should be removed. Because if the citizens don't have immunity, why should a leader have immunity, especially in respect of criminal cases? We can have immunity in respect of civil cases, but on criminal cases, especially issues that borders on diversion of funds and mismanagement, I thought that the issue of immunity should be set aside. Person should be able to answer those issues even while in office, not after leaving office.
There's this trend that I've observed as a reporter, that most times when a state can meet up with workers' salaries, the next thing they tell you is there's a committee that has to be set up to ensure that there are no ghost workers, and that means they have to be verified. Is that really the way out? Because most oftentimes, these workers don't get verified for more than a year, 2 years, and that means they don't have any salary to collect as at when due.
While as organized labor, we will want a process that is transparent, and we don't want to be seen as encouraging the issue of ghost workers and ghost figure. But let me also make the point that the issue of ghost worker and ghost figure syndrome is also perpetrated by the political elites. In some states, they inflate the salary, and whatever is the remnant, they share it, and they claim that is actually ghost workers and ghost figure. A worker will not actually perpetrate such ills in the system. And that's why in most cases, you have not heard of anybody that have been prosecuted over the issue of ghost worker and ghost figure. They will only tell you, oh, we have recovered X amount of ghost workers. 20 billion have been recovered. Who is behind it? There is no answer up till now. And therefore, why we will support a process of making sure that the right workers are being paid and we eliminate the issue of ghost workers and ghost figures. We can also agree for that process to be used to delay the payment of worker salary, because in some states it has been used. Months upon months, it will be verification upon verification without an ending. And therefore, they hide under that to also perpetrate the delay in payment of salary. So the two must have where to strike a balance. Well, I will agree on the issue of verification, because we also, he who wants equity must also go with clean hands. Yes, workers must support those processes, but those processes must be time-bound. It must also be with the understanding that whoever is caught, even if it's a government official, that person should also be prosecuted. But in all the cases I've had so far, including the one of federal government, where they said X amount of money have been recovered as ghost figure or ghost workers, nobody had been charged. Nobody had been made to be responsible for the issue of ghost workers. They will only say this amount have been recovered, but maybe also the person perpetrating the ghost worker and ghost figure is a ghost, and that's why the ghosts have not been found. And I think it's a gimmick of trying to actually divert attention from the real issue. So this, we must have a balance, we must strike a balance to say that yes, while we agree on a clean-up process, but it must be time-bound, it must also be made public, and whoever is also found wanting must actually face the right of the law. That is what will clean our system, and it will be a better approach than using it as time-wasting, like it's been done in Kogi. Over 1 year, you are doing verification upon verification. So those you verify today, you pay them. Next month, their name will disappear from the pay list. You put another people's name. That will not help. What will help is a process that is transparent, a process that is anchored on justice and fairness, and is also anchored on respect for human dignity. A worker is a human being that needs to be dignified. He is supposed to work under a condition that will be celebrated, not a condition akin to slavery. And therefore, this is why we have continued to advocate, and we have tried also to make the point that we must see issues from the perspective of what should be done to address the issue, not from the perspective of what will compound the problem.
The minimum wage is top priority for the Nigerian Labour Congress. With this development of states not paying salaries as at when due, and also pensioners also not receiving their monthly stipends, do you think when the minimum wage is reviewed and we have a new figure, do you think that the state government will be able to meet up with payment of salaries or maybe pensions? Let me tell you the fact. From time immemorial, the issue of minimum wage, particularly when we started in 1981, have always been through demand by unions. No employer all over the world will willingly tell you that it has enough or more than enough to actually pay workers. Particularly when you look at other sectors, businesses are actually for profit. And in the context of Nigeria, most businesses, first, their priority is to make profit. It's not to create jobs. And that's why there is this issue of contestation between labor and capital. So we must situate the argument within this framework to understand the centrality of the issue of welfare of workers, contestation, and the workplace, and also industrialization in general. So clearly speaking, why workers are not being paid now in some states, as said clearly, is about lack of prioritizing the issue of payment. It has nothing to do with resources. And that's why you see that enormous resources is still being chartered away on monthly basis. If you look at some of the statistics today, I was reading in some of the analysis that have been made about a lot of resources that have been chartered away, either through what they call security vote or through very bogus governance structures, where the cost of governance then become extremely high, that most of the resources will be taken away. I've also seen the argument, some of the figures being quoted as wage bill is not actually the salary of workers. In fact, in most of the states we have visited, they will enroll many political office holders, 1,000 assistants, senior special assistant, junior special assistants, and then lump up the salary as salary of workers. This shouldn't be the case.
the salary of workers should be distinct from the salary of political office holders. If we do the needful, clearly speaking, as we have done in the past, it's possible and it's really something that can be done, and therefore that is why we are consistent about it. And even though the organized private sector, none of the sectors have said the issue of minimum wage is not desirable. It is desirable, and they say yes. What is the difference? It's only the figure. We are quoting 66,500. Some of them are quoting 40,000. Some are quoting 60,000. So this is the only difference. But nobody said that it's not legitimate because the argument cannot be sustained. We are coming from an 18,000 minimum wage that was equivalent to $145. Today, that same amount, the value have so drastically reduced that is less than $50. So the argument about the purchasing power of Nigerian worker and the pensioner cannot be argued anywhere. And therefore, this is the fact. And the fact of the matter must be understood, except you want to have a working poor. People are working, yet they are extremely poor, and therefore, we now have a pool of the working poor. And that is what we are trying to run away from, because if a family cannot be able to take care of their immediate needs, it then means that certainly there is something fundamentally wrong with our system all over the world. And even within the African context, Nigeria earns the lowest minimum wage as of today. It's a fact that cannot be disputed, despite the fact that we have the largest economy in Africa. At the time, we have the largest economy. And also looking at our GDP, when you compare with smaller African countries, we must give priority to human capital. The centrality of every policy must be about human beings. It is when you have human beings that these policies can work. And when you have extreme poverty, then insecurity will follow. Because families must be able to take care of their immediate needs. If not, then there will be a compounded challenge of development. And this is why we have made it very central to the argument to say that, yes, the minimum wage is due, and we are following up the process very closely. And by the grace of God, I think, hoping that this August we should be able to be through with the consultation and collective bargaining process, and we should be able to transmit our reports to the executive, and thereafter we follow up the process of making sure that it's enacted and workers should be able to actually have a minimum wage. So we are very passionate about that. And every worker, every pensioner in Nigeria today is very passionate about that because of the situation of the economy, because of the fact that workers have been at the receiving end.
Can you name states that have signified interest in paying the proposed new minimum wage? And also, can you also state, name the states that are actually paying more than 18,000 naira as we speak?
As I speak to you, although we have decided that those information, since it's already on the table, is an information that at the end of the day, until we are able to transmit our report before it's made public. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to divulge such. But I think more than 21 states have actually sent in memos and are also in support of the process. Some quoted figures, but I think for now.
States are paying more than 18,000.
Yes, many states are paying. Edo is paying 25,000. Akwa Ibom State is paying higher than that. Even Nasarawa here is paying 19,500. So because the minimum is supposed to be the minimum, below which is like a national benchmark, below which no employer of labor should pay below that. That's to regulate so that there is no exploitation.
What is the Nigerian Labour Congress planning to do to ensure that states like Benue that is defaulting in payment of salary as at when due actually stop that and actually conform? And it's a two-in-one question. The Kaduna state government sacked more than 40,000 workers. Right now, as we speak, he's employed some of them, some new workers, and he has insisted that there's every possibility that they won't be able to join union. So what's your take on this?
First is that we have done a lot in states where salaries are not being paid. We have had about 3 visits, particularly to Benue, where the governor himself participated in the process of finding a lasting solution. We have an MOU. We even constituted a committee to verify the actual figure that is being used to pay salary. And that figure actually crashed. And therefore, our expectation now is that what we have been able to set as a target, the government should be able to follow through that process. And if they do that, it's possible that this issue can be addressed. And that is what we are committed to doing. The labor law is very explicit. You cannot declare redundancy or sack any worker without the input of his union. It's a fundamental principle because there need to be a discussion over his severance pay, over his terminal benefit. Yes, we agree. Employment is a contract between the employer and the employee. And at any point, that contract can be terminated. But you must respect the rules. The rule is that if you are asking me to go, my benefit must be ready. As you are giving me my sack letter with the right hand, you must give me my pay with the left hand. This is fairness. This is justice. But once you don't respect that law, it means you have broken the law. And it means you don't have respect for human dignity and for workers. And this is what is happening there. Those workers were thrown out, over 40,000 of them, with impunity. None of them have been paid. Most of them are entitled to their gratuity and their pension benefit. The right to belong to a trade union of your choice is a constitutional issue in Nigeria. And they have sworn to uphold the provision of the Constitution. In fact, their oath of office is that the Constitution will be upheld to the latter. Section 40 of the Constitution said, every worker, which is a direct interpretation of Convention 87 and 98, which Nigeria have ratified since 1960, is one of the fundamental principles of the right at work, that every worker has a right, for the purpose of protecting his right, belong to a trade union of his choice. So no employment whatsoever should restrict that worker or deny him the right to belong to a union for the purpose of protecting his right and interest, because he needs to know his condition of service. He needs to determine his condition of service. He needs to participate in the process. He can't demand for review of those conditions. So it is illegal, null and void, for any employer to say that he's denying a worker the exercise of this fundamental right. It's a global, in fact, it's akin to human rights, because trade union rights are also human rights. And that's why these two things are interwoven. And for anybody to think under this dispensation, democratic dispensation, that he wants to deny workers this fundamental right, is not only an irony, it is really an unexpected situation. And that's why we have said clearly, workers should not lament. Pensioners should not lament. We have the number. Put our families together, put our pensioners together, we are in the majority. And therefore, let's use our number. Those that have done well to us, which we have mentioned them, we should support them. But those that thought that workers are a liability, they are also a liability to the current political dispensation. And therefore, we must tell them where also they belong. We have our number. So this clearly is a decision we have taken consciously at our National Executive Council level. We'll support those that are pro-workers, and we'll also deny those that are anti-workers.
That's all we can take on today's edition of the program. Join us next week for a fresh edition of the show. I am Sharon Ijason. Thanks for watching, and remember, labor creates wealth.